Hi Greenstyler, it's Angie,
and Savannah.
and today we're going to make the Boca base swimsuit.
Alright, so now we are making the bottoms, and you want to put the two lining pieces, the front and the back together, line them up at the crotch seam, and do the same for your main fabrics. And for the main fabric pieces, you are going to sew all along this crotch seam, but on the lining, you are going to sew across, but you're going to leave a hole about this big while you're sewing. Alright, so here I have sewn the crotch seam of the lining, and right here I left a hole right there, so I just sewed from this side and this side. And then on the main, you just sew all the way across. So since the lining is a little bit smaller than the main pieces of the fabric, first just focus on sewing one leg seam. So just pin one at a time. Alright, so now I have only pinned one side, so I'm going to sew just along this side and then come back to you. Alright, so now that one of these sides has been sewn, you are going to kind of shift the lining fabric over a little bit because the lining is a bit smaller than the main fabric. So just line that up and pin all around. Alright, so now I have them pinned and I'm just going to sew along there.
Alright, so after you've sewn the two legs, we are going to put swim elastic or clear elastic and stitch it. Do not stretch. We're going to sew this at a 1-to-1 ratio. So that means exactly the same length as the other. Make sure that you keep the elastic on the inside or on the side of the seam allowance. Alright, so after you've sewn your elastic, you're going to turn the whole piece, right sides out. So just reach through, start to pull, right sides out. And then you're going to take and you're going to match up the side seams. So you'll take the side seams of the lining to the side seams of the lining on the back and the front. Pin that into place. Trim off your edges there. I start and stop my elastic about 3/8 of an inch from the edge. So when I sew these side seams, there's not elastic there. So the only key or important part here is to make sure these edges are lined up. And I like to push this seam allowance of one edge to one side and the seam allowance to the other. Just make sure those are lined up, snug against each other. And I like to put a vertical pin in at that location so it is less likely to shift when I go to sew that. So do that on both sides. And then we'll sew those side seams. All right, so now we've got the side seams done. So I'm gonna take and lay it out, and I'm gonna mark the center front of both pieces, and I'm gonna put a pin on the right side of the center front. So I'm gonna measure seam allowance to seam allowance. So this is the right side center front, and mark that. And then this is the right or correct or outside of the center front of the other piece. All right, so once those are two marked, and we know we're gonna want to turn it so the right sides are together and the center front matches up with the center front. So now I'm gonna open it back up. And then I'm gonna start to roll everything in the middle together so that I can bring the center front of the lining, pin is on the right side, to the center front of the main, pin is on the right side, and everything is tucked in the middle. So I'm going to match those two up, take those pins out, hold it there, put my pin back in on that. So then we can go back 4 to 6 inches and another 4 to 6 inches towards this side seams, and we can pin it. And then we'll have to sew, and we're gonna have to start to sew before we can do any more pinning, because that's about as far as we can go now. Everything else is tucked inside. So I might start right around here and sew to about there, and then we'll start to pull it through as we sew. That's that center front. And we can get to about that other place where we pinned. Now we're gonna have to start pulling it through. So reach inside, start to pull through, match up your seam allowances, your side seams. Side seams match. Reach through, pull some more. Keep going all the way around. Sewing at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. pulling, and eventually you'll get back to where you started. Your side seams should still match up. Keep pulling all the way through. And then you're back to where you started. And it may not look like much because all of the rest of it is tucked inside. So now we're going to do the exact same thing with a zigzag and put elastic across the top. This is the top waistband. So I'm going to put elastic on that top waist seam, just like we did the elastic on all the rest of it, with a zigzag stitch. Again, some people have a serger that does this with, you can feed this elastic through while you do the stitching. I do not. So I just go back later and stitch it on with a zigzag. All of this can be done with a zigzag stitch instead of a serger stitch. If you don't have a serger, it's okay. It just has to be a stretch stitch. Again, don't pull it tight. But just a tiny little bit of finger tension is okay. Just continue to pull it through that opening as you go around the waist seam. So after you've stitched elastic along the top waist, then you've got to find the center crotch where we left that opening. And we're gonna reach through. Took me a while to find it. We're gonna reach through and grab a piece of fabric and start to pull it out through that little opening. So just kind of work it out. It'll eventually come through, I think, if we did it right. It's kind of a puzzle. Keep pulling, keep pulling. Hooray. It did it. And you work it out. And then that's really done. This is a really neat way to make this reversible if you'd like. Oh, the last thing to do is take a hand needle and thread and just stitch that opening closed. If you don't ever really want to wear it as reversible and or you do not have a hand needle, you can just pinch it with the seam allowance inside and do a straight stitch across that if you like on your sewing machine. A ladder stitch or a little hand stitch has a nice look to it and it's smoother if you do it that way, but you're welcome to do a straight stitch on your sewing machine there. So that's that. Now you have completed the bottoms of the Boca Base Swim and you have the top done as well. So wear it, take pictures of it, post them on our Facebook group or Instagram page. We would love to see your creations. Thanks for joining us.